Recording. I'm Mr. James.
And I'm Mr. Ritchie.
And we are the
The
Educators.
Educators.
And look at the only time I'm going to do this, maybe, I don't know. I wore this sweatshirt that says the state. We are from Maine. We wouldn't buy this if we weren't, right? I mean, it is.
And I love lobster personally. I know, and I appreciate the mainness.
Yeah,
of
it's got the little thing in
sweatshirt.
there.
Yeah.
It is October 8th. It is Thursday. It's our day. It's the world is absolutely still a mess. And I mean,
It's not getting better either.
I put notes, and the last time we put this up about a second case coming in at our school, really close, right in our wing, basically. And we're just kind of holding on. We've got a good system, I think, at school, right, for removing people when we need to, but
it's working.
Yeah.
And like, I think we talked about that last time, that it's the cohorting. If I don't know if that's a word that's being used nationwide or anything, or worldwide, but cohorting is absolutely working. And we've been in a good shape as a result. And very few kids or classes have had to be quarantined as a result. And, it's doing what it's supposed to.
I mean, we're surviving. And
yeah,
I feel bad that I don't think we're absolutely thriving in everything we're doing. Like, for instance, today was a cohort B day, and we had students come in, and we literally had to combine 2 days worth of work for them. Because we wanted to be like, oh, if they're not going to be here tomorrow, and like for me at least, tomorrow was going to be my speech on this is what I'm giving you to take home. So for the 2 days I don't see you, this is what you're going to do. And I had to combine that with the today, and I kind of have mine out like I'm acting in a show, and I have a specific thing that I'm following, and I try to throw things together. And it was only one class where I basically talk about a book I'm about to share. This is amazing, this book, and this whole big thing I do with the jacket of the book and this stuff. And then I get out, and the teacher walks in, and I'm like, oh, I can't read this book to you right now.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to see the Monday students are going to be in Tuesday. So we get an extra long weekend. We get a workshop tomorrow, but
yeah. Well, part of the issue is, as well, is that for you and I, especially, we last year had 40-minute blocks.
Yeah.
Now we have 30-minute blocks. So to take away 25% of our time, that's an enormous chunk of time to have lost.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's one of the many sacrifices that we're making, as well as more input. I mean, I'm working through the weekends, and there was a recent thing about teachers need to, a lot of teachers nationwide are like, just worldwide, really, are feeling just this burden, this enormous weight. And just like we talked about, like, it seems all of the pressure is going downward, as it usually does, and it lands squarely on the teachers. And so right now, there's a lot of people are just like, you know what, I'm going to have a weekend where I can just relax and not invest all of my energy into my job, because I deserve that. And that's an okay thing to realize at this point in the year, I think, because I've been investing an enormous amount of energy. I'll never complain about my job, because I truly love it.
Yeah.
But at this point, I'm like, you know what? Like, tomorrow's workshop day. I left earlier than normal. I only stayed like an hour longer than my contracted time, and tomorrow I'm going to be able to just focus on certain things that I need to get done and go home for the weekend, enjoy a long weekend. And I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Which is pretty rare in the middle of a pandemic. And unfortunately, the numbers, they're still staying pretty steady. Today, across the world, up from last week a little bit, about, only about 20,000, but like, we're up to over 2 million new cases last week. We had 2 million new cases the week before, around 2 million cases the week before that.
Wow.
Pretty steady. In the United States where we live, weekly increase of 319,622. That is up about 30,000 more, or greater than 30,000 more than previous week. And it's America, 30,000 people. I mean, sure, isn't a giant majority, but man, that's a really big point to remember, that that's a lot of people. And then the weekly increase here in Maine, 213 over the last week. Now that is a little bit less than the week before, but it is steady when we consider the weeks before that. But what I like is that tonight, once again, like last week, we are going to kind of try to take a break away from talking about this all the time. And we even picked some good science stories this podcast that we can talk about, or they don't really involve the virus itself. So I'm excited to talk about science in the news.
Yes, and that's our next segment. And so one of the big things I want to mention too is that I keep getting stuff sent to me. I'm getting a lot of different things. I for some reason on my phone, which is a Google Pixel phone, and I look and I have to keep updating whatever's going on for news. But they intersperse between the news. If you're searching for science, say, here's a science thing. And one of the news items today is a science thing that I feel is misleading, and obviously there's not a lot there, but it's just one of those things that popped up, and it is from a source, and it is in some sort of journal or something, but it just there's a lot of red flags there, but we'll get to that. But just the fact that I'm getting news all week and I'm getting all these things that are popping up, and I just wish I could separate my trustworthy, my facts that I can go through, and the rest of the junk, the social media. Just I like things compartmentalized a little bit. I don't want everything dispersed. So like one news thing is this big thing about the deaths for COVID. The next thing is, what is Beyonce wearing, or something like really like. There should be a priority list, like severity of how it affects humanity. That's what I want.
Yes.
And I wish I could tell Google that. My phone's gonna be like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, like
I'm sure there's a way to do it.
It's buried somewhere in there, because there's a lot of news out there that we could talk about, a lot of news that we could focus on, and we do have to sift through an enormous bulk of just bad information. And we were going to talk about that too in one of these. But the gift of sift, that's something that I think I mentioned a couple times, but like just being able to be aware of bias and aware of angles and aware of things helps you figure out what news you got to focus on. But it is laborious, and you have to invest effort into doing this, and it does get tiring.
And if you know some basic science, then sometimes you'll be like into like that breaks a law. And how we'll get to it, we'll talk about that, like the hypothesis that someone might have turning into a theory, and then eventually standing the test of time to become a law, like the law of gravity. I just dropped my phone, I caught it, but that's happening. It's not a theory of gravity. It's not a hypothesis of gravity. It's a law. We know it. It's understood. If you don't believe in that, then you're expecting anything can happen, because if you don't believe in gravity, then, that's kind of a mess. But so a lot of people can be charlatans and pass things by you. So hopefully not our listeners.
No, I think that the multi podcast listeners are definitely here for like legit science. So I'd love to hear some of our listeners reach out and let us know what we should talk about soon, because we're going to keep talking about things science, living on the moon, different places, how we're going to keep the species alive, how we're going to keep ourselves alive. And part of that involves looking back in the past. And so one of the first stories is, so bones from an Iron Age massacre paint a violent picture of prehistoric Europe. So what's that about?
Yeah, so I love archaeology, and they basically, once again are finding humans meeting each other. Maybe not just the humans that we know as Homo sapiens, but meeting up with Neanderthals and different groups, different tribes meeting and fighting and stuff like that. And from markings they have from the bones and such of that.
Yeah.
But interesting that, I mean, because as most people understand it, life comes out of Africa, the originating. And an interesting thing, I heard recently on another podcast about that is how diverse people in Africa are from different countries in Africa, and just like even within multiple parts of a country, how vastly different people are, because that is the first civilization. So much change has happened just in that area. And I feel people give Africa a big pass, like, well, you know, it is just like, are you African? You're just thrown into that category. But no, that is so much more diverse. There's more diversity in Africa than there is in the entire world. And no one doesn't understand that. But so thinking of this is in Europe, and the fact that they're finding, you know, they're always trying to find how far back we can go and find humans, and what they were doing and what they were eating, their diets. Were they just hunter-gatherers? Were they actually starting to grow crops? What were their textiles? What were they making? And if there's some sort of warring tribes or what happened basically to start to build a civilization, because why would one side want to take over another side? They want resources, basically. It's got to be something for resources. You know, even when you hurt somebody, it's for some sort of resources, even if that resource is just power. So I just thought that was interesting.
Having read through it, so I sifted through it, and what an incredible story. So like they came upon, like while excavating, they came upon this like village that by all evidence given was like ransacked. So they analyzed 9 different skeletons. And so like, you know, obviously a human skeleton is pretty, like, it's pretty common, like just to be able to see where they were turned, you know, how, you know, there's a whole science behind that. It's escaping me right now, but like the whole science of like especially analyzing crime scenes.
Forensics.
Thank you. Yeah. So, you know, forensics on bones, you know, of people that have been dead for a long time. So we're in this story, they're talking about people that have been dead, you know, since, I mean, basically over 2,000 years. And so they find these skeletons, and they have all of the marks of sharp weapon injury.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, so you find suddenly, like you're digging, you find 9 skeletons in this certain area, and they all have these sword-like injuries. Yeah, you can draw some conclusions from that, and it's so interesting to see that like that's a lot of people to be basically taken out. And it's, you know, there's a big age span in the skeletons they found, and you know there's like jewelry associated, like the people that did this did not steal the jewelry off from them and that's what an enormous find. That's incredible. So, and this took place in what is now Spain. And so beautiful climate, you know, probably able to escape freezing temperatures for most of the year. Yeah, it's probably a great place to be that long ago, and to have this violence around, like that's really unfortunate. And it's really cool that through science we're able to retell these stories of these people that were forgotten about for 2,000 years.
It is another interesting telltale sign that people have always been fighting.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Love to fight.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a mess. The other big, and this is something that I was really interested in for a science thing, is the gene editing tool CRISPR, which we mentioned before, and it does sound like a chip. Hey, want to have a CRISPR? Great, they're delicious. But the people that have kind of brought this in existence, they won the chemistry Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it seems like that could have happened a while ago because
I know. So I've been with my wife for 12 years, going on 13.
well,
And when I met her, me and her had like a discussion about like DNA and things, that she had researched CRISPR before, and she's the person that I learned about CRISPR from. And now scientists are being awarded the prize. Like we knew it was pretty awesome and it had some really astounding possibilities back in the day. But yeah, I agree. I'm surprised that it took this long.
I'm just glad that, I mean, and so anybody who doesn't know anything about this, look it up. CRISPR.
Yep.
It's
Genetic
just
scissors.
yeah, it's basically they found a way to get in there, and they're expecting this is going to be the way we basically can alter genetic code. And
It looks to be like the way in,
yeah.
like you find the place in the code that needs to be edited, and it's your scissors. It's your in. You get to, and that's an important thing to do, because it's like chemistry, because it's all about the right chemicals lining up and matching in order to cause motion and movement, and um, it's amazing and beautiful on like a really small scale. Like you're actually thinking about these just balls of energy, which are atoms and molecules,
Yeah.
interacting with each other inside of your body. And when you can study something that small and be able to come out with studies like this, that actually show that they work. Like we understand at the molecular level how to inject a certain gene into a chromosome.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, like you have an enormous amount of possibilities, and every time that they put CRISPR to the test, it seems to be successful.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a huge piece of what's going to be life extension eventually.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's I don't know how these prizes work. I mean, as far as like the money issue and stuff like that, but I I think it's been on everyone's mind basically for many years. Anyways, I just hope that this gives it more. Maybe it gives them resources now. They have money,
Yeah.
funded by governments. Maybe the governments needed that. Well, when they win a Nobel Prize, we'll give them money. Yeah, you better
Right.
be giving them billions of dollars.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, the world we live in a capitalist world generally,
Yeah.
and everybody's out to make money. And so in a unfortunate reality, we all got to worry about resources and making money. And in these labs that can do this amazing work, they need money, they need funding. And
Yeah.
it's all about what we tell our government to choose what to spend our money on, is what drives this innovation. And so that's why we gotta, I personally think that we gotta work together and just put science, ahead of a lot of things. I wouldn't call myself a technocrat by definition, but I definitely think that we're just leaning towards a technocracy in general, where people with the best technology lead.
Yeah.
And so I might not think that that's the ideal utopia for Earth, but it is what it is. And I think that we gotta really start paying attention to the science that we can do for our own bodies if we're gonna
Oh,
extend
yeah.
our lives, if we're gonna be healthy into the future.
And let everybody know that you basically are on that, and you're part of that, like you really want,
Yep.
because that's one of the other big things I think that we can do basically on our level. Next news item: large scale changes in Earth's climate may originate in the Pacific, and I don't
Yep.
find that surprising.
No.
The Pacific, not just that, but I mean it's a pretty large body of water, and it's also, I just feel like we've got all these people think, especially in the U.S. Pacific, more of a tropical, climate, warmer ocean, and also a lot more life. I think diversity made possibly in the Pacific than in the Atlantic. although we're still
Yep.
talking about the ocean in general. But
Yeah.
I do think
There's
that
one ocean ultimately, but
yeah,
yeah, there can be definitions.
yeah. So that could affect, and I mean, it's just them sort of like saying, well,
Hmm.
comparing parts and places like this part of Antarctica and the Arctic basically can affect this part of the world. You know, I just feel they wanted to
Absolutely.
localize something. We all realize it's going to happen when they say, well, this is just we're just going to, you know, the whole world's affected. We're just going to make it a little bit smaller so we can kind of focus on that one area and say, we think this is going to happen here. And I think they just want to give direction because everybody wants to have these efforts to help, you know, the planet from climate change.
I
But
hope everyone has that inside of them.
yeah,
I
yeah.
wish that upon everybody. Yeah.
But it's just that giving them something kind of points yourself in that direction of
So
that.
it talks about how the ice sheet served as like a wind barrier. It changes the wind. Obviously, if warm wind interacts with cold surface, it changes the temperature of the wind. It
Yeah.
lowers the temperature. Therefore, whatever effect the hot or warmer wind would have is diminished by the cold interacting with it, because it lowers the temperature of that air. And that's what wind is too. A lot of people, I don't know if a lot of people understand where wind comes from. All that wind is ultimately is just a temperature differential.
Yep.
Which means there's just different temperatures at different places in the earth. That's literally it. If we had the ability to take an entire planet and just perfectly make it so that like everything was the same temperature on the surface, there would theoretically be no wind as
Yep.
a result. There'd be no waves in the ocean because wind is in waves. Waves are a result of wind for the most part. There are other factors sometimes, but um, but for the most part, winds just temperature differential, and that's it. And so, if you don't have these giant ice sheets on the planet, top and bottom, yeah, winds are going to change, and so that changes climate in a large scale situation.
It was windy today where we were.
Yeah,
It was cold today. It was
yeah, it was
windy, and
windy
it's
today.
basically bringing in this cold air, and it dropped. It's like 20 degrees less than it was
Yeah,
today,
it changes
and
the temperature of the objects around it, which lowers the local temperature. So
yeah,
that's how you get microclimates versus, the climate. But like, yeah, that wind takes, the temperature out of the building we live in. Like if the building was 70 degrees one day and a 50-degree wind hits it the next, it's pulling the energy out of that building. It's pulling that energy out of the trees, makes the entire area around it colder for a little longer. And yeah, I mean, so on a large scale, like glaciers, it's going to have some effect
yeah. It's
elsewhere. And that's,
over that.
yeah,
So this last item is the one that we had a big question about. We'll do real
right.
quick with it, but this is just one of those things where you hear it and you go, wait a minute, that kind of breaks some of these laws that I'm thinking about. And it was physicists. This is from the University of Arkansas. Was posted on the 2nd of this month. Physicists build a circuit that generates clean, limitless power from graphene.
Now it's all dependent on like this vibration, this resonance almost of a graphene strip.
Hmm.
And so my initial thoughts, just by like checking out this story, so they produced a very tiny amount of energy. So like they put energy into a circuit,
Yeah.
and the end result of that circuit was a little bit more energy than what was put in. But the circuit that they're talking about is like these, few atom thick layers of graphene, something that's easily vibratable,
Yeah.
if that's a word. But like what I think is that there could be easily an outside influence that hasn't been discovered.
Yeah.
And they say, while not being very powerful, this could one day recharge, low power batteries, basically like cell phones. If it can recharge low power batteries, it can be scaled up to power entire cities. And so there's no limit to this technology. So you know, you've got to look at the possibility of it. And I think that if you're measuring stuff on this like tiny scale, if you can't factor out like, I don't know, like radio interference and things like that, I don't know. I think there's something going on that is adding power, you know, like maybe it resonates with a certain radio frequency. So this
Yeah.
external energy that you wouldn't think of helps vibrate that thing a little bit more. And it's so small. The measurements that they're making, they don't even actual data, like they don't release the numbers. They say it's more, it's a greater amount than what was input. And so as a result, you know, we just got to wait and see. There's a lot of these new power technologies out, and I hope one of them works. I really do.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing is, so there are laws of something called the laws of thermodynamics,
Yes.
and energy cannot be destroyed. That's one of them. Uh, and energy cannot be basically created from nothing. And at the
Right.
same time, you know, it turns into other forms, and it's not like the other big thing, and it's kind of like everybody knows that, is that you can't make it out of anything, and it's not going to, there's no such thing as like limitless energy. If you have to put energy in to get energy out, and there's always something lost, so that it doesn't, if you want it to become this and it's here, if it goes in to make this, it also becomes this, and this is something you don't want. So it doesn't always make what you want. You can't make
Yep.
energy out of thin air, and there's no such thing as limitless energy. It's the whole
perpetual
thing.
motion.
Yeah,
Right?
there's like this.
Perpetual motion.
It's
That's what these people are claiming, that they're getting more energy out than what they're putting in, which is perpetual motion. Like
a
you
perpetual
technically
motion
could put that
machine, which is
into a
like, yeah, usually, and it's
mechanical form, yeah. But it's they're obviously, there's no mechanics in this. It's just electrical, but like still same thing. So we'll probably hopefully dive into that a little bit later, especially if they come out and they're like, nope, we really proved it. All right,
yeah, great.
my opinion will be swayed by
Get some more
science. So if
scientists on that. Get some more scientists on that, because that's what we need
Yep,
for the moon, right?
that's what we need for the moon. That's right. And so we're gonna go into living on the moon part 2.
Yes.
And so what's the huge part of our day? What's a bigger part of our day than food, right? What's keeping us going?
Yeah. I mean,
And
food
so,
and breathing, right? That's
yeah, well, we hope when we get there and we're breathing. We hope we figure that out when we get
well,
there. Once we get there, it's like, all right, I'm hungry. What am I going to eat? And so there's a couple of alternatives. Like, let's look back at the people that actually have been to the moon. So 24 people have been to the moon, and 12 actually landed and walked upon it. So those 12 that landed upon it, you know, they're broken up over, I think, 6 or 7 different missions, and the last of which, you know, stayed the longest, you know, a few days on the moon. So of course they brought, you know, basically MREs, or, you know, these prepackaged meals. They had this machine on board that you take the packet of super dried whatever it was, and it squirts warm water inside of it, and that turns it into a paste that you can eat.
yum.
There's definitely some serious, definitely means like nutritious food that provides vitamins and like micronutrients.
Hmm.
And so a lot of those can be found in obviously plant-based versions. So usually there are meat-based foods that go into orbit, and with the astronauts that went to the moon and stuff like that. But for a long-term stay, you've either got to rely on these autonomous resupply ships, which are theorized because we don't even have them yet, or in situ growing.
Yeah.
And you know, basically, are we going to pay? Which would we rather pay for? Sending food from Earth, and right now it's 10,000 pounds. I mean, $10,000 per pound to get it just from the surface of the Earth 200 miles up to the International Space Station.
Yeah.
And so to go to 250,000 miles, how much is that going to cost? So if it's $10,000 per pound just to get to low Earth orbit, which is, you know, over anywhere between, you know, basically 70 to, you know, 250 or even greater, whatever. miles, but the ISS stays around 200 to 250 miles. $10,000 per pound to get it there. Now we're going to send it to the moon. Well, all of a sudden, that turns into like, $30,000 a pound just to get it to the moon. Or do you grow it in situ?
Yeah.
And so, in situ meaning growing in your situation, basically. And there's a lot of challenges in growing food on the moon. For one, the moon sees a lot more sunlight and a lot less sunlight at one time than the Earth. So the lunar days and lunar nights are much different than on Earth. And so your greenhouse, what you're growing your food in, whatever food it is you're growing does not have a long enough growth cycle to live through one lunar day or night. So you have to have this form of artificial light in order to grow food on the surface of the moon. So automatically you're upping the weight that you have to send and invest into the moon, or do you resupply by sending food that was grown on Earth? So quickly, the cost and efficiencies sort of like they're really in competition with each other. And if you have the ability to grow food on the moon or get a greenhouse on the moon, number one, you have to deal with pressure. There's no pressure, virtually no pressure on the moon. We enjoy almost 14.7 pounds per square inch on the Earth at sea level. So, obviously, if we're up in the mountains, it could be a lot less than that. But the lowest that we have people functioning is around 4 psi. And that's people that are on EVAs. So EVAs are extravehicular activities, like when you're in space. So when you go out of the International Space Station into a spacesuit to go outside and work on the outside of the International Space Station, you have to camp out, is what they call it. You go into a pressure vessel, put on your suit, or you wait to put on your suit, but you go in this pressure vessel, they shut off the pressure, and you go from 14.7 pounds on the International Space Station down to 4. And you have to do that because for the same reason that divers have to wait to resurface after diving really deep. That's because you'll get the bends, you'll get these nitrogen bubbles in your joints. It'll just be the worst pain you've ever experienced in your life. So they have this slow acclimation for the human body. Like we've discovered this. We've been studying this for hundreds of years, so we know it's true. So 4 psi. So let's say putting 4 psi into a large structure when the outside environment is a vacuum. What an enormous undertaking to reinforce, like especially if it's glass, to get the sunlight in, to reinforce the structure to hold 4 psi. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're dealing with a almost perfect vacuum of the moon's surface, you have to deal with this pressure differential. And so then with the light, like I mentioned, you have to have artificial lighting. So you'd probably have to have either solar collectors or some form of energy input, nuclear or something, in order to keep the lights on, because most plants want 16 to 18 hours of light per day. And if you mess with that, it will change the growth rate of the plant itself and largely lead to not beneficial results. So like if you put a 24-hour light on a plant, it doesn't make it grow for 24 hours straight. It needs rest, as any living object, any living creature kind of does. And then another couple things too is temperature. Obviously on the moon, in the sunlight, it's like 275 degrees, and in the shade, it's negative 250. Same thing's going to happen inside of that environment. And if you put a bunch of heat into a room on the moon, the negative 250 degrees that it's going to be outside of that environment is just pulling, through the laws of thermodynamics, like we talked about earlier, pulling that heat and energy right out through the glass or whatever the structure is. And so ultimately, it just depends on cost, right? It depends on, is all of that going to be cost less than food shipped from the surface of the Earth?
Yeah.
And that's, we got to try it to find out. And that is, I think, what the next step is. I don't want to take up too much time here, so I don't know how much time we got left for this segment.
Yeah, I
but
think we do maybe 3 more minutes.
3 minutes, yeah, perfect. Because then there's another conversation that we've got to have. With how much science are people willing to live with inside of their food? Like, me and you, we have a pretty good view on food and supplements and things like that. But some people don't, like GMOs, things like that. Well, if you're on the moon, you're gonna be eating GMOs. Like, there's, there's no GMO-free option when you're living on the moon, because if we're growing food in situ, we're gonna have to have the best of the best plants that are specifically meant to grow there. And so you can't have soil. Soil brings with it a bunch of, it brings its own microbiome. You've got to have bacteria, you've got to have even viruses sometimes, or take a good beneficial role in soil. Like, soil is such a rich and like vibrant ecosystem in itself, that it really kind of limits growers on the moon to hydroponics. And there have been people. And so one of the people that argued with me when I released my thesis on this was a guy that was taught by Buckminster Fuller himself. His name escapes me right now, but me and him talked. He was one of the lead researchers on Biodome, like the actual Biodome, Biosphere, the Biosphere 2. And so I met him in person, and me and him had this conversation. I gave him my thesis paper. He gave me his feedback, and he loved my thesis paper. But the thing that he criticized me on the most was soil versus hydroponics. And I had come to the conclusion that you must have hydroponics, completely controlled chemicals, input gives you the output. And he thought that growing soil, from human waste and things like that were not only possible, but the only way to grow food in situ. So there's a lot of research that still needs to go into it. We don't have all the answers, but we got to try. We haven't been trying for 40 years. So we've got to be sending research missions to the moon and giving this stuff a shot. Because once we get there, human beings are going to have to deal with the human condition. And I think that's what the part of this that you're going to talk about.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to mention, because you mentioned he was arguing about the soil thing and human waste, and that isn't that the Martian? The plot for the Martian, if anyone want to watch that movie, that's one of the big plot points in the Martian, when he does that sort of thing. And maybe he had some input on that.
Exactly.
But
it's a great debate that I look forward to having with him again someday. And looking forward to anybody that's watched The Martian. Supposedly you can grow potatoes. There's a lot of plot holes that we could talk about someday about that. Maybe we could do a reaction.
Yeah, it didn't look like in The Martian, if they wanted to make everything seem true, it didn't look like he was getting that much nutrition. He looked like a skeleton. And he's have a scene when he's washing up, and it just doesn't. It's like, that's great. And what about
living
the protein?
Off potatoes? Yeah.
10 years of little protein bites. They could totally make that. Tiny. Just here's either 5-10 grams of protein you can eat. Boom. And we coat it's nut butter, basically, like a block of just like solid fat and protein. Boom, there you go.
Yep.
Nuts, seeds, compressed.
Yeah.
You gotta find a way to make things into smaller packages. So anyways, the new social norms of the moon system, that's what I call this.
I like it.
Basically, people have to live together. And I'm thinking this is what's going to happen, because there are two things I follow. You follow one of them. You might follow this other one too. The first one is the Venus Project we talked about the other week. The Venus Project, go online, find the Venus Project, and see how amazing this idea was from this person from, I believe, the 60s that came up with this. And it's basically like an economy that's based upon resources, and things are completely different, but people live together without all the problems that we've basically seen in this world, government and certain belief systems just overruling and just irrational people. I mean, this is based on technology.
Yep. And I think that you and I have got to do a deep dive on the Venus Project alone, because it's such an amazing concept. It's an amazing, like, there's even this like small village where they really tried, they put on this, they build these structures that they're talking about. They try to build this economy they're talking about. And honestly, it's probably the best option, the best idea that I've heard of for the future of humanity.
The other one, and I'm actually adding, I didn't add the link earlier, but I'm adding it right now to our show notes, is something called the Seasteading Institute. And what this means is making a floating city in international waters, and basically doing the same thing that the Venus Project was going to try to do, is like basically making a new civilization somewhere.
Yeah.
And they said in doing this in international waters, basically without government, everyone kind of knows that international waters means that, you're outside of any government control, so you can do your own thing.
Well, maybe not everybody knows that, but like, so not, because I was like thinking that, international, there are these lawless places on the earth, but they're on water.
Yeah.
And I lived in Hawaii for a short while, and there's this community of people that live outside of the international water border, and they often do huddle their boats in a close enough realm where it's kind of like a community, and sometimes people barter, they trade, they go and get lobsters at the bottom of the ocean somewhere else and bring them over, they offer them to the people, they got to live. And so it's possible. There are people that actually do this now. The idea, I think, is to make it bigger and more, not luxurious, but like just more modern, more futuristic, really.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like seasteading was like, oh, the Venus Project on water.
Yeah.
And I thought that's great. And I was actually part of this thing a long time ago when I first found this, and I helped support them a little bit with a donation because they started to drop some plans they needed, and I supported that. I think it was a Kickstarter thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, it was all about, there's going to have to be a new government, and it's going to be completely based resources, technology, science, rational, critical thought. It's basically a scientist's dream to have a place that basically had complete rational people. I mean, almost like, PhDs in a university setting, all sitting down at round table, whatever, and talking and feeling like they're among peers and, that sort of thing. I felt it was like they want to create a place for those that actually care about education and care about how humanity works. And they're going to have some very strict rules. They put enough strict rules on themselves and how they live. So that's just going to be kind of like the norm with this. And I feel like being on the moon is going to be the exact same thing. Things are going to be different. It's not going to be how things are, especially how we see it in America now, and how we see on news programs about how we've seen people not wearing masks, or how people go about conducting themselves, and what people think of as leisure time, and what you do. And, we've seen enough of this. I've seen enough of this. I don't seem to belong too much to the society that does a lot of these things anyways, but I feel the bigger norm is they're going to be personal beliefs are not going to trump functional survival and science. So you can have any beliefs, whatever belief that some mythical thing happened, or some reason for life, but whatever those beliefs are, it's not going to be something that you can make a big claim for on the moon, when it's about functional. What you do has to be functional, and it has to be based in science, because it's survival. So there's no space for that. If you want to think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're going to try to fill the bottom here. That's the moon right there, right? It's going to be a long time before we can get to the top and have the flying spaghetti monsters and whatever else. It's got to be the bottom. We have to think about, so.
And if everybody's focused on building from that point up, then, the idea is inevitably, maybe we can entertain some of those, if that's really like in the human psyche as a necessity,
Yeah.
that's something that we can deal with after we deal with getting the basics.
Yeah, and
And when
it'll get there. You get to the self-reflection, you get to,
yeah,
spirituality, you get to all of that stuff, which
yeah,
everyone still fights is necessary, and we're not arguing any of that. It's just the fact that to start this thing, it needs to be like really strict like
it needs to be
that.
secular. It needs to be
Yeah,
secular. It has to be in order to make it work, because there can't be accommodations when you're living in a life or death situation,
yeah,
unfortunately. And
yeah.
then that's really what it's going to be for the first colonizers of the moon. So absolutely.
I think it's going to be. I mean, it's going to be a while till we build that up, and that's one of the big things I think. When someone mentions, hey, would you like to be on the moon? Would you like to, not that I think it's going to be like that. I think it's going to be only the brightest and those that have worked the hardest at being able to maintain a certain body that can manage those situations, and mental agility that can basically keep up and help to function that. But if they did that, it's going to be easy. Like, do you have any beliefs that would trump you from performing functional survival skills and science-based, motivation? Like, if there anything that does that, do not sign up for this, because this is
Yeah,
how
and
we need things to be.
I wish that I could enter a community just right now where if people said no, they just weren't there. Like
Yeah.
if you can't put science as like the leading source of information, I probably don't want to associate with you alone. So like, yeah, I'm all in, and I would love for this to be reality, because on the moon we're gonna have to be just serious and honest about everything, and every day is gonna be survival. On the ISS, every day is survival. They get woken up, like right now, they're dealing with a small air leak on the ISS, and it's like if the leak increases, yeah, they're gonna wake up the people that live on the ISS. There's 6 people living on there,
Yeah.
and they're gonna go and try to find out where it is, and they can't find it yet. And it's just this thing, that your air is leaking out a tiny amount, tiny but measurable amount, and it's like we don't have time to deal with accommodations and anything like anything outside of survival right now. Like we're trying to make sure the air stays inside of this thing,
Yeah.
which is basically the most important thing.
I
And
know.
that I think that brings along a sort of clarity, because like we if we all had a job, it would be something that you have to work for, and if we don't work as a team, um, you know, everybody fails. So that's a good amount of pressure to have on somebody to generate them to get them to generate more effort, I
Yeah,
think.
and I put this in the notes, and I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but I feel like Earth may eventually be something for those that aren't moon caliber. I mean, I don't want to think anyone to think like that. Like, I'm all for equality, equity. I want this to be a place. I want this to be our new civilization. I want us to
Sure.
colonize other planets. I want us to be interstellar. I want all of this to happen. I think humanity needs to sometimes buckle down and get the job done. Figure out your priorities, get your head out of the sand, and stop thinking of all of these nitpicking things about social issues, about, you know, things that people are taking for truth, that are incredible, are old or not as old, and aren't really fleshed out. And it's just like, look where you are. Are you wearing a wristwatch? Is it a smartwatch? Are you brushing your teeth? Are you using technology right now? Are you relying on technology that basically some of the norms you follow, belief systems don't kind of agree with it, yet you follow technology? You kind of have to be this person who realizes that this is a job. Living on the moon is a job. You're going to
Yep.
have to do this sort of thing, and it benefits everything you do is going to benefit everybody, but you have to sort of do that. I think I keep coming back to this. I discussed this last week too. And the whole point of these social norms is that the drama that we have on Earth, that we have anywhere, it doesn't exist on the moon. It doesn't exist in space. It doesn't exist under these circumstances. It cannot. We cannot have any of that. It's an absolute no.
Yep.
Your job is to do this, do that. After we get something settled, which is going to be years of getting this thing to work, then there may be higher order things. But for the most part,
Yep.
people aren't discussing this sort of thing. It's just one of those things. Some people have just they have certain interests they have, but they still get the job done. They don't have to mention things. They don't have to be swayed by something. They're still going to get the job done. You can think about it after. Many people make decisions and then they have to think later, like, did I make the right decision? Everyone has got that. This thing is going to have been planned out, and you kind of have to be an automaton and just like make things work before you can get to a system, before it becomes like a second Earth and we can have some of that drama or extra stuff that we call our arts and our, what makes us human beyond the fact that we cook our food, which is basically my definition of you're human, you cook your food, right? What other animal cooks their food? We cook our food.
No other animal cooks their food. That's right.
We get our nutrients, more nutrients from food when we cook it.
And so in some of my talks, I talk about that too, because inherently, human beings are inherently out of tune with the surrounding environment because we require so much energy spent. Like cooking food is such an enormous energy investment. Like it is a faster form of what is it called? Entropy.
Yeah.
It is a faster form of entropy than any other form of life expends at all, just because we cook our food. We cause the world as we know it to change into a more disorganized form by burning things to cook our food, and that's accelerating entropy ultimately. And but also too with this idea of us having this colony on the moon, it definitely, especially being Americans, it does strike this curious nature in me to say, would an America event happen when the moon inhabitants seek to separate themselves from Earth after a few years? And I almost feel like it's inevitable. Right now, we're kind of like, in human history, we dipped our toes in supposedly 1492 with Columbus, right? So if we go with the standard version of American history, all right, so let's go with that. The standard version says we dipped our toes in 1492. When did the first colonies happen in America? Like 200, like 150, 200 years later, like people started seriously trying to live in the United States, what would become the United States. And it's like, we've dipped our toes on the moon right now. And I'm hoping that gap, like that, the difference in time between when we dip our toes versus when we commit, is smaller. Because we dipped our toes, it's time for us to, like we did in the 1600s, invest in reaching the new world and trying to live there. And it's going to be something very similar. And I eventually imagine moon inhabitants would want no taxation without representation.
Yeah. I also think that if they're there, I think we're going to look at everyone out there as heroes, but maybe also learn from them, saying, look they had a job and they did it, and they weren't caught up in this drama and these, I believe this, I believe that. No, you're wrong, blah, blah, blah. Listen, there's air leaking. We're all going to die. Fix it. Right? No one's worrying about, they're not worrying about that. We can look at that and go, wow, how do they focus so well? And maybe learn more from that. I mean, getting jobs done. There's something about just getting work done and feeling good for doing that, getting stuff accomplished. And, we can all argue about what work means and what is that? Maybe your priority, my priority is something else. it's literally about we need to survive, and we're taking it day by day. And people on Earth, whatever anyone does on the moon, they're going to criticize every single thing that's going to be done. But they're also going to have people working on figuring out every next step ahead of time, and troubleshooting it. So you have a lot of people working with you. And I feel that's a great way to kind of work with others too, because anybody who was on the moon basically had a whole like system on Earth trying to like figure out things for them. So they were out there, what do we do next? They can't be alone. They've got all these people working for them. So that's how it's going to be. And I feel that's a good way to feel like you have 50 people that have your back, at least. I mean, just imagine that. And here on Earth, I have I have you.
Yeah.
I guess I have a few people that have my back. I mean, it's so much nicer to have.
The Apollo astronauts, I mean, again, only 24 people attempted to go to the moon, and they all made it.
Yeah.
But 12 walked on it. But behind them was 250,000 people.
Yeah.
250,000, manufacturers and operators and all of these different jobs, like human computers before computing existed, and so that's what it's going to take, especially for the colony level moon inhabitants, when it's considered a colony versus its own independent site that can support itself, which could happen. It could happen someday. There's going to be a certain difference in that, because if America couldn't have existed on its own without Europe, or without Britain, then we would have had a certain different outcome. Like, so if on the moon we can't figure out how to support ourselves, we're going to be at the leniency. We're going to have to have this connection with the Earth. And so for anyone looking forward to living on the moon someday, which is, if some people think that we're talking crazy, it's not crazy. It's really possible with the technology we have. It's just about investment. But like, for those people thinking about living on the moon, we've got to think about how we're going to eat. And I think that's a big question mark right now, but it's something that's solvable. And we just need to invest in effort in looking into it, I think.
Sounds good. So we'll be back next time with part 3. We're going to figure out what we exactly do in part 3, but this is so interesting. I think we're going to do some things, and we've got a lot of things planned coming up, and a lot of new updates for our thumbnails and pictures and things like that. The YouTube stuff, right? And Anchor's doing, you're going to hear some more podcasts. So here's some more ads coming up, and everything's working out right now. We're getting things moving, except for the fact that we still have this virus and flu seasons coming. So whatever, we'll be back. We'll always be back.
That's right,
guys. Well, I'm Mr. James,
and I'm Mr. Richie,
and we are the educators, and we're all from Maine. Have a good night.